crazy for feeling so blue.
And welcome back to FRS Election Night Coverage 2012. We are here with Nat Fortune, and welcome back again, Mia. About that last speaker, Ronald Reagan again, in his inaugural address, he did something that has not been done very much since then. He congratulated and really sung the praises of the Carter administration and the smooth transition of power. And hopefully we can have a smooth transition of power either to the same or to different hands this time around, and have everything go swimmingly. Now, Nat Fortune, you are a local school committee member, as well.
School Committee, Frontier School Committee, and Collaborative for Educational Services.
So education is clearly something that's important to you.
Sure.
Would you say education is one of the most important issues in this election?
It hasn't had a lot of coverage, I would say. Of course, jobs and economy have been what you've heard about the most on there. And I think education has been relegated to the sidelines there, but the lack of funding for education is still a serious problem, particularly if we're going to be prepared for the future.
Where would you place the blame on lack of funding for education?
Well, the federal government doesn't contribute a lot to education, only about 8% of an average budget. And most of that is for programs for some support for special ed or for Title I, or to try and help particularly disadvantaged districts in there. So most of the funding is expected to come from the state or the local governments. And ever since we passed Proposition 2.5, there's been this understanding that the state needs to also step up and contribute its share towards education in here, because there's only a few sources of revenue that are available to the towns to vote on, and those are limited. So the towns have continued to step up to the plate in the Union 38 and Frontier Regional, and I'm really grateful for that. But the state hasn't lived up to its share of the bargain. I think the fraction of state support has dropped from 50% to below 40%, over the 10 years or so that I've been serving as a school committee member. And so you see that is where it's hurting, where there's fewer programs to go around, and it's in the schools there. And so that plus an increased focus on testing has meant things that aren't tested sometimes. There's pressure to go by the wayside. Thankfully in this district we've held on to the things that really, the idea of trying to teach the child rather than the test, and to educate the whole child through arts, music, and athletics, and all the things that really make a school something where you're really learning for your life and rather than just for a test.
All right. Which candidates on the national level or on, say, our senatorial election would you say have talked about education the most or have the best policies for education?
There hasn't been a lot about education because I think the two presidential candidates that have been covered have been too busy running for president of Ohio. And so the rest of the country has been a little bit left out. So issues as important as why there's massive flooding along the eastern coast and why we have these tropical storms and diseases, how we're suffering through the ravages of climate disruption brought on the global warming. It doesn't come up because it didn't come up in Ohio. And they're too busy worried about trying to promise to protect coal jobs that are phasing out. So you don't hear a lot about education other than the claim that the other person has not been, is responsible for whatever problems you think are in the schools.
Well, you hinted on the fact that the main two parties are mostly campaigning in Ohio. You are also involved in the Green Party of the United States.
Well, I'm treasurer of the Green Rainbow Party, which is merged from the Massachusetts Green Party and the Rainbow Coalition Party about 10 years ago, and is the Massachusetts affiliation for the Green Party of the United States. My work really is mostly local. I'm supporting the presidential candidate, but I've not been involved in that campaign in particular.
Okay. What would you say, in your experience with the Green Rainbow Party, has been going on in the area? Would you say things have been growing at a grassroots level? Would you say that voting Green could actually improve things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I ran for state auditor 2 years ago and managed to get 5% of the vote. And I managed to have some of the other candidates adopt campaign positions that I'd had there. And so we're starting to see a little bit more on the money that we throw away even before it gets to the school, money that we throw away for special favors for particular companies as opposed to trying to do things that would benefit all companies within the state and all people within the state. But I would say that you're starting to see a movement at the state rep level. There's a very exciting campaign going on in the 2nd Berkshire District. We're challenging an incumbent who's incumbent Democrat in that particular case in a two-way race, Scott Lagenauer, on his second run. We've had 2 very, very close elections in an adjacent district in Pittsfield there, and some promising things, I think, other parts of the state, but really the key to the growth for the Green Rainbow Party or for green principles in general is going to be starting at the local level and building up, having knowledgeable people who are ready to try and change policies even at the town level and be prepared and actually be qualified to run for state office.
All right. Mia?
Yeah, so you were talking a lot about how the Green Rainbow Party will be able to kind of get a little bit more of a local and build kind of upward and outward. So how would you almost sort of encourage other people who maybe aren't as confident in that party, you know, they're more for the bigger, you know, bipartisan situation. How would you sort of convince them and try to get them to on board almost? What would you tell them is important to know about this party?
Well, if you really think that one of the other candidates running is your preferred candidate, you should vote for them. What we're trying to speak to are the people who feel that neither party is speaking to them, or that the issues that they're concerned about are not even coming up for discussion. Oops, I think I've lost my my sound there. And so on the presidential level, if you wanted to hear some plan about why we bailed out the banks instead of homeowners, you weren't going to hear about it. If you wanted to hear what we should be doing to address climate change or how we should be trying to plan an economy that would actually be sustainable and a new Green Deal, you wouldn't have heard about it. If you wanted to hear about privately provided, publicly paid for health care, you wouldn't have heard about that. You wouldn't have heard about the erosion of civil liberties under the Obama administration. You wouldn't have heard about the continued war in Afghanistan, because both of those candidates that actually got coverage were in agreement on all those issues. The first debate in particular, the moderator had a hard time finding disagreements between them. So there's a lot of issues that just don't come up if those are the only 2 parties that you have represented. On the state level, I think that until you actually break the control, say, of the Speaker of the House, you're not going to have the truly democratic institution you'd like. Democratic as in open to the public and responsive to it, rather than responsive to the Speaker. Or so when it comes to legislation here, there's so much money we throw away at the local level before it could even come to the state. That, you know, we could all the money that we think we're paying our taxes for, it's not going to those things. It's not going to the schools. It's not going to local aid, because it's going to giveaways before it even gets to us there. And these are, you know, if you had a broader range of perspectives, if you had better representation there, you'd have a party that would actually say, now wait a minute, instead of paying for a pocket full of promises, things like $60 million blown on evergreen solar, you know, for the promise that they would have jobs, what if we'd use that $60 million to actually buy solar panels and have them installed on every town and school across the state? Then we would actually have gotten something for our money. I think, you know, we're not so rich that we can afford to, well, there's a saying that only the rich can afford cheap things, right? We're not rich. We need to have our investments pay off for us. When we spend money, our tax money, we're making investments that really need to pay off, and we can't just give away money on the promise that something good might happen. And so we would really change what we use our state tax dollars for. I believe it would be able to lower them and get actually more services. So this is the sort of thing that we're trying to change, or that local candidates are trying to push for on that regard.
That's great. All right, thank you. Well, on another topic, just kind of branching off onto what do you feel are the most important issues right now in the presidential election for each party almost, because I feel like they are so different and that they could each have a different agenda going for them, but to each party, what do you think, and then all together at a national and potentially Senate level?
Well, I'm not quite sure how to address that question. I mean, I'd say that the sky is not falling with the particular election in terms of what can be discussed or what can't be on there. And I have on the presidential level, my assumption is that if I wanted my vote to count, I needed to vote for Jill Stein. As I'm in Massachusetts, it's a foregone conclusion that President Obama will win this state, but if I want my voice, if I want there to have been a voice to tackle climate change, to address the bank bailout, to actually stop the erosion of our civil liberties, I need to vote for the only candidate that was actually advocating for all of those things. And to be heard that way. You can be heard that way by registering in the Green Rainbow Party as well. But I would say certainly that in terms of the priorities of the other candidates there, you know, the first priority is to get elected. Right? And the second is, it's a little hard to predict what Romney would do because there have been so many different Governor Romneys, you know, and candidate Romneys. And President Obama hasn't actually yet delivered on things that he has promised. So I don't know whether to hope that that would change. So on the Senate level, I would clearly prefer Elizabeth Warren to Scott Brown, primarily on the hope that Elizabeth Warren would bring the sense about consumer protection that she did before she started running for office. But the claims of a dire calamity either way are hard to believe because it was said that, oh, if the Senate flips from one way to another, all these dire consequences will come. But the Senate's in the charge of the Democrats now, and yet nothing can happen. It was claimed, oh, you actually need 60. And if the Senate flips to Republicans, the Republicans aren't going to have 60 votes either. So I think you're going to see the same logjam or impasse regardless. With that said, I think that Elizabeth Warren's focus on consumer protection is a good distinction between her and the incumbent, Scott Brown.
Okay, great. And I heard you mention sort of how a brief mention of your opinion of how the president's done so far. I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more. I know that there's a lot of controversy over people saying that he hasn't done enough, he hasn't done what he's promised. What is your sort of opinion and take off of that?
Well, you know, I just feel like if this was Christmas, in my stocking I'm finding a lump of coal no matter who gets elected, because in fact both of them are running around claiming that the other one is anti-coal. The other one is opposing the expansion of the production and use of coal for electricity, which is going to accelerate the release of CO2 in the atmosphere and accelerate global warming, accelerate the propagation of tropical diseases that we suffer from and the problems. We can't have our football games at night because of the tropical diseases carried by mosquitoes anymore. The droughts and the floods and the hurricanes that we're encountering, the statistical increase of that is because of the global warming. We're already seeing the consequences, and it didn't even come up. You know, that's the real challenge. If you had a broader representation of parties, at least the other two would have to speak to the issue, and now they don't. And so the failure to act on that is abysmal. The failure to act on the war in Afghanistan is a problem as well. And I think the erosion of civil liberties is a problem as well, particularly. So anyway, I'll be looking to see, like the rest of us, who actually is elected there. But I'm hoping that whoever it is, that there will actually be more pressure on whoever is president to change those situations.
Great.
Well, thank you, Nat, for coming on.
Okay.
It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.